So good evening, everyone. I can see people are just clicking in and joining us now. So welcome to another week of 120 Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum. This week, I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Margaret O'Shaughnessy, the director of the Foyens Flying Boat and Maritime Museum. Margaret, thank you so much for being here.
Sorry, no, Sarah, just belongs to everyone. You're very welcome, Sarah. Delighted to talk to you.
Brilliant. Well, I'm so chuffed. It's yours is a museum that I've had great fun actually experiencing as a visitor. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the kind of behind the scenes world of the museum this evening. It's, I think it's an amazing visitor experience. That's the one thing I took away from my time visiting Foyens. It was such a wonderful, truly fantastic experience. So to everyone who's with us here this evening, if you have questions for Margaret as we're going through, please just type them in and we'll very, very happily get through them over the course of the evening. But Margaret, you might just start by introducing those who aren't familiar with your museum, just the general concept of it.
Well, I suppose, Sarah, it goes back quite a while now. It goes back to originally 1987, when I got a group of aviation people and business people together with the idea that our tiny village in County Limerick had a very famous past, and there was nothing about it. And as time goes on, as you know, these things get lost. And as a child, I remember hearing about it, but after that, the next generation wouldn't know very much. So we had several meetings, and we set up a company in '88, and we got opened on the 8th of July, 1989. Now that sounds very simple. It wasn't that simple. We had, first of all, to find a premises. We secondly had to find sponsors. And we thirdly had to find what would we put in this museum, because while it was in Foyens for over 10 years, there was nothing in Foyens that would relate to the story. So I, first of all, took off on what I call now a crazy journey. I flew to New York. I went to I chased to all the places that flying boats had come to Foyens from. So I started in New York. At least I knew there was Irish people there to put me up and look after me and whatever. And we went to Port Washington, and I think I got the very first item ever there from a wonderful woman whose husband was the navigator on the first experimental flight. She gave me the logbook, and he was Masland, was his name, Bill Masland. So we were eternally grateful for that. I thought that was a prized possession. And then I went on up to Shediac in New Brunswick, which was an overnight stop in emergencies. And I was hosted there by the town council, because remember, like all museums there, we had no money. You have to bum, and you have to use every contact you have. And then I went on to my favorite place in the world, up to Botwood in Newfoundland. And they were so gracious there, and we still go there, and we still have great friends there. So there wasn't much in the way of materials. And the next thing was to know what could we do and where could we do it. So we approached the port company in Foyens, and we said they at that time owned this big building, which has a long history. It was originally a hotel, the Monteagle Arms Hotel, in 1860. And then it became a next to that then was when Dev came down, they took a compulsory purchase order and part of it to set up the offices and the control tower for the airport. And later on, it became a residential Irish college. And then the port company were using just a portion of it for their offices. So there was quite a bit had gone into dereliction, really. So we approached, and eventually we got a lease on 4 outhouses with mud floors, stones, and there wasn't, I mean, cow houses would have been in better shape at that time. So next thing was money. So we had a place. We had got a wonderful historian, and he does historical exhibitions and all that, called Jack Harrison from Galway. And we had a conservation architect, because it was a listed building. So next thing was money. So the man that came to our rescue was the late Dr. Tony Ryan, who at that time was with GPA in Shannon Airport. And he gave us £50,000, which of course in 1988 was quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
but we had to find another 350. So bank loans and donations here, there and everywhere in hundreds and fifties and anything, fundraising, everything. But eventually, anyway, as I say, I made a contact with a most wonderful woman, I suppose, which changed my life quite a lot. And that was the late, great Maureen O'Hara. And people often say, but why her? Well, her husband was the late Captain Charlie Blair, who everyone in Foyens knew about. He was the handsome 6'3" dashing pilot that always came in, that always chatted with the locals, you know, and he was really their god. And, I contacted her and I told her we were thinking about doing this and would she use her name and her fame, I suppose, to get the word out. And she said, stop thinking about it and do it. That's the kind of woman she was. So from that day, 1988, until she died in 2015, we were the best of friends. And she used her name and her fame over all those years. And she officially cut the ribbon on the museum on the 8th of July 1989. But the nice thing about that day, and I often regret it, I'm sure as you go through the years, Sarah, you have these functions and you never get time. You're running and racing to make sure everything is right. And when it's all over many years later, you say, my God, why didn't I? And why didn't I is a big one for me, because we brought back hundreds of former Pan Am employees came from America, BOAC came from the UK, and they came from Bermuda and various places. And it was the biggest collection, I would say, of past crews and staff over many years. And I just regret that, unfortunately, I didn't have the time to sit each one of them down and interviewed them and get their stories. Some of them continue to be friends over many years, but they were elderly and they're all dead now, every one of them. So I regret that we didn't get to get their memories. And I think so we started with 4 staff and we were ambitious. We were saying we'd take on staff and we'd have to pay them. And if we couldn't pay our way, we weren't worth our salt. So we opened on that day, and the first summer we got 7,000 visitors. And I suppose from then until now, in dribs and drabs, eventually in 2002, we managed to buy the entire building from the port company. That was a big step for us, because we could now develop and extend. And over the years, we've done all sorts of exhibitions and extensions. And I have to say that we were set up as a charity and a not-for-profit organisation. So there's no main sponsor behind us to write the checks. And you know what that's like. But I have to be honest, without the support of grants over the years from the Department of Tourism, Culture and Arts, as it's called now, but it has different names over the years, Department of Arts, Department of Heritage, we would never, ever have succeeded in doing what we've done, and Fault Ireland as well.
I think, as you said, for charities and non-profits like yourselves and ourselves, you become so acutely aware of the kindness and of the support that's given to actually make your work possible. I think actually today being Thanksgiving, it's perhaps a nice moment to actually recognise that. I was only in touch with one of our supporters over in the US earlier on today, and like that we were saying it is important to actually stop and take that moment just to say thank you, in the same way that I guess you were talking about those key milestone moments, and that we don't always get the chance to stop and take a breath and actually look at what's going on. Like I know we're coming up on our 10th birthday now next year in the little museum. And so we're actually trying to consciously take a pause and actually acknowledge that milestone and think about it.
Well, we're over 30 years. We now have 26 staff. And for a small village, I mean, the population has been declining again in the village. I think at the last census it was around 460 people. Okay. And we have the biggest building in the town. We restored the control tower, which was wonderful. And of course, the big thing for us was that we managed to get this wonderful guy called Bill Fallover up in Wicklow, who does film sets and constructs all amazing different artifacts and items for film and everything. And he built us the Boeing 314 replica, because there are none in the world. And only next week again, I have some people coming to film, and that has brought us enormous good media and publicity. But like you say, Sarah, I have to take my hat off to our American supporters. They have been absolutely brilliant and still are. I think the American people have it in them to donate, and they look after their museums and their charities in huge ways. We're not there yet in Ireland. We have some wonderful donors in Ireland, but I don't think it's into the ordinary psyche yet, you know, to think about donating.
I think this year may well be contributing towards that in the kind of the circumstances people find themselves looking around us. But actually, just when you're touching on Foyens there, just for everyone who's with us this evening, in case they're not familiar with the backstory, would you just talk to us a little bit about the role that Foyens actually played in establishing kind of commercial flight as we know it today?
Yeah, I suppose it's an amazing story, really, in that it goes way back to when Pan American were looking at developing transatlantic flights. And so were Imperial Airways at that time. I'll just trace them for you. Imperial became BOAC, became British Airways, and Pan American were Pan American, and they're long gone now after Lockerbie. So Foyens was chosen by Lindbergh. Colonel Lindbergh was sent to Europe and to Ireland to find suitable locations that could accept flying boats, because for those that don't know, flying boats are aircraft that can only land on water and water only. And he chose Foyens. And the first trial flights came into Foyens in 1937. And we've had, I mean, I could keep you for a week. In 1938, they tried the most extraordinary experiment of a piggyback or Mayo composite, whereby the British hadn't aircraft capable of doing the long journeys with enough fuel. So they came up, Major Mayo developed this piggyback, which is very like the space shuttle today. It's a plane tied on to a bigger plane, and it takes off in a piggyback format and separates in the sky, and the top one heads off to America, Canada, and the base comes back. That was done in 1938. And the other amazing experiment out of Foyens was in-flight refueling, which is a big thing today. That was done over Foyens. But anyway, by 1939, they felt secure enough to try it with passengers. And so we hit another, I suppose, brick wall in that Pan American said, we're going to go first. And Imperial Airways said, no, we're going to go first. And as most people know, you can't have two firsts. So eventually it was decided they'd each go from opposite sides on the same time and land at the opposite sides. So that's what happened on the 8th of July 39. Pan Am landed here, and Imperial landed in Port Washington, Long Island. So that was the first flight. And from then on, the routes were developed. You could fly from Foyens to so many places. You could fly to Lisbon in Portugal. You could fly to Africa. You could fly to Bermuda, the Azores, Canada, and America. And from America on down to South America. But unfortunately, that was in July 39. And the Second World War broke out in September. So that changed passenger travel and all of that again. However, very few people realize or know that all through the Second World War, while Ireland was a neutral country, the British were running our only international transatlantic airport, as well as flying into it, because BOAC were the airport operators as well as the flying into and out of Foyens. So they started to come in here, and that's when it gets funny, because as I told you, it's a very small village, no hotels, no B&Bs, no accommodation, no phones, all these things, which was amazing. So a lot of the local women decided to tidy up the house, get the kids out of a room and rent the room and make some money. But then, of course, they started getting ideas, and they started hanging out all these signs, you know, the Palace Hotel and all of these. But I think the funniest name we found in our research was the woman that put out a sign, and she called it the Unida Hotel. UNEEDA. You need a hotel. I thought that was priceless. So all these people moved into Foynes and set up. A lot of them married locals, you know, have connections still today. A lot of locals joined up the airlines and transferred when we were finished to Rhinana and later Shannon Airport. So there's umpteen stories like Roy Rogers coming in on a flight and a few locals challenging him to a donkey race on the pier. You know, customs, of course, were another thing. They had a bit of a banter going on, or a barter, I should say, going on with the stewards would come in and they'd bring in the silk stockings and the lads here would give them fresh meat. So there's so many stories that so many books could be written on what was going on. But I suppose the more important thing was we became the major escape route for refugees from the war in Europe who wanted to get to the United States and Canada and start a new life. A lot of the Jews escaped through Foynes. And over the years, we've had a good few back with their stories. One lad last year came, he was Polish. And he said he was a baby and his mother, and they fled through Foynes. His father joined the French resistance. And he brought us his mother and his passport, which was stamped Foynes on the day. So there was good stories and bad stories. We never had any crashes or anything like that, but thousands of people went through, you know, and Bob Hope, Yehudi Menman, John F. Kennedy, Gracie Fields. Gracie Fields used to come in several times, it seems, and used to do an impromptu concert down at the quay for the locals. And she'd go up the street and buy a parcel of meat from Bill Butcher, who was the local butcher. So lots of stories, Sarah, that social stories, funny stories, and also that we played a massive part in the development of what we know today as wonderful passenger travel, hopefully again in 21. And so Foynes was Ireland's first international transatlantic airport and was known at that time as the Shannon Airport Foynes. People get confused when he gets to Irish coffee. They say, but it was Shannon. And I say, yes, it was Shannon, but it was Shannon Foynes, not the Shannon people know today.
And it's fascinating to hear the kind of the international scale of the impact that we were having at that time, but also the kind of the local communal experience and kind of being part of a community, and the, I guess, how the people, the passengers flying in and out actually kind of left their own imprint there and had some personal connections. Like the flying boat that you talked about, I have it written down here that it was a model B314, what you have a replica of, and you might just kind of, I'm hoping that people on the call this evening, some of them have been to you, but for those who haven't, like when you walk into the museum and you're walking around the flying boat, talk us through the key elements of it as a engineering.
It's a monster. It's a double decker. The pilots and everything are upstairs in quite a large area, but two crews to fly it, one sleeping and one flying. It could seat 69, but never did, only once on the Atlantic. Normally it'd be 28, 30 people. But the standard of the luxury of it was even surpassing, I suppose, first class today. It was expensive. It was $337 for a single ticket, New York Foynes, and I'm trying to remember now, 635, I think, for return. But so you got on board, you had your beautiful seating, but you also had the availability to you of they converting into a bed while you traveled at night, and you had your little curtains, like Pullman coaches, really, I suppose. And you could go to bed and hand out your shoes, and they'd come and they'd polish your shoes and have them laid out and press your clothes and have them there in the morning. The food was exceptional, with full waiter service, served table, and all that food was prepared on board. There was a honeymoon suite at the back, which you could book during the war to travel in, and that was an exclusive suite with its own bathroom. And I'm trying to think, upstairs then you had your pilots and your radio officer and your navigator. and you had a kind of a walkway down into the nose of it that had pulled down little bunks for the crew that wanted to sleep. But also, if they had a problem during the flight, there was a hatch you could open from the cockpit and crawl out to the back of the engines. I mean, it was quite different.
Wow.
Yeah, but the Boeing 314 was the aircraft of the time. 12 of them were built by Boeing. Pan Am ordered them all, but they sold 3 to BOAC. So BOAC operated the Bangor, the Bristol, and the Berwick, and Pan Am operated the other 9. And they had a fantastic record. They were commandeered then for the war. I mean, the first ever Air Force One, as we were just after elections, was a Boeing 314. It flew Roosevelt to Casablanca to meet up with Churchill and Stalin and all of that. So that was the first time an American president had ever gone by air like that. They usually went by boat. So it was the first one of those. Unfortunately, none of them are in existence today. But I suppose, again, going back many years, I'm very grateful to Boeing. They gave me the blueprints, and we gave them to this wonderful guy, as I say, Bill Fallover in Wicklow, and he just built us the most amazing replica that is 100% correct. But we had to get the tweed for the seats spun and every little detail, you know. But people have come, we've had funerals on it, where pilots' ashes have come back. Their wish was to come back and go on board that. And so there's tears often, you know, you get the sad stories.
I think that is the, I think one of the privileges of running a museum is that we do get to have very honest and vulnerable conversations about individual people and their own personal relationships with our individual subjects. And that's a really special thing. And it's just when you're mentioning that about engaging with different pilots and their own personal relationships to Foyens, like, talk to me a little bit about the aviators and the kind of the pioneers who are actually some of the key figures who are coming in and out of Foyens.
Most of them wouldn't be known even, I'd say, Sarah. Harold Gray, I suppose, would be the dashing, handsome man that was the first guy to fly in with passengers. People say it was Charlie Blair. No, he was much later. Harold Gray was the main one. Laporte was another one. These are names that would hardly be known. Harold Gray eventually, or finally, I should say, was president of Pan Am many years later. And like that in the story, you know, only 2 years ago, we got a contact. First of all, a man walked into my museum maybe 20 years ago. It's funny the way stories in museums go. We were small, 4 rooms, all the rest of it. And the staff said to me, there's a man down in that room crying. And I went down and he introduced himself as Harold Gray's son. And he said, I'm here in a small village in Ireland. I'm listening to my father on the radio giving interviews, and I saw him in your cinema on the screen. He was a marvelous man, but there's nothing to him in America, right? And he said, I must say, I've moved house and I might have something. And time passed and we never again heard from him. And about 3 or 4 years ago, out of the blue, we got an email, is Margaret still at the museum? And it turned out, anyway, it was his family. He now had Alzheimer's, and they needed money and whatever. We bought his father's collection from him. So we got back, for instance, a silver tray that was presented to his father in 1939 when he first arrived in Foyens by the Foyens Development Association. And it was lovely to bring things like that back. People laugh sometimes, and you'll understand this, Sarah, things that have no monetary value, but have a huge, huge nostalgic value for a museum. You know, you can get things sometimes and you'd open the post and people say, well, why are you so excited? It might be an envelope, it might be a letter, it might be passport, whatever. But to us in the museum world, these are the items that give us stories. And while they're worth nothing on the open market, they're worth a lot to museums. So without people giving all this material to us, I mean, we have a massive, you'll understand, having gone through the standards program, we have a massive archive. We have all the weather maps for every single day. signed by the guys that drew up the maps from 1937 to 45. So we get people coming, they're writing a novel, and they want to come and check out what the weather was like on such a day or such a, you get these. Ken Follett came to us a long time ago in 1990, and he wrote a great book for any of your listeners called Night Over Water, which is quite authentic. It's about a hijack of a flying boat that left Foyens with a lot of wealthy people on board. And the movie is in the process now. So hopefully that'll get made. It'll be down, I suppose, to finance. But, so there's all so many angles.
But it is, though, I think the ability of a seemingly incidental item to actually tell a story and to give some level of insight is such a fascinating privilege to have that job. It's one of the parts of the museum that we particularly enjoy. And I think as founder yourself, one thing I'd be really curious about, like obviously, as you said at the beginning, it started off no building, no money, nothing to display, very much kind of the same experience that we had some 20 years later. But I wonder if there was one moment in the journey with Foyens, like if you had a moment where you consciously realized, oh, this is actually going to work.
Yeah, there's been quite a few of those moments, I suppose. I suppose the goodwill of people to us gave us the confidence that we could continue. I'm noted for thinking big. It's probably a failing of mine. Sometimes I think too big, but I didn't come from a museum background. I came from Bank of Ireland, where I worked in Dublin, and came back home, got married, and ran a business with my mother and father. I would never, if you had asked me 30 something years ago, what are you going to be doing in 30 years time? Not in my wildest imagination could I have said I'd be doing what I am. But having said that, it has given me a most wonderful life and got to know so many wonderful, wonderful people, particularly, as I said, the old timers from that time. And only the last one died last summer, and she was from Dublin, and she was Lal Kerwin, married Dowley. She married him from Foynes days, and she lived in Martha's Vineyard, and she died at 95 or 6. And she was the first ever ground hostess. And she told me about going to Ryanana when Foynes finished. And Aer Lingus didn't have much money either. And she said they'd work for BOAC in the morning, and they'd go into the toilets, herself and her sister Helen. They'd change their clothes and come back out as Aer Lingus. We can't imagine these things now, but they had great times. But the one thing I'll say, you see, Sarah, if you got posted to Foynes during the war from America or from Britain, you made damn sure you didn't get unposted or changed, because they had a great time here. There was no war in Ireland. They could fish, they told me. They could go to Cayley's. They could, swim and bathe and play all sorts of golf and everything. And they didn't have the worries that a lot of people had based in other places. And there's one quote in the museum, if I can think of it. I got all diaries from guys that lived here, and I had to pick out, and he said, this is the damnedest, wildest, most beautiful country you could ever be in. And I think that's describes us well.
Very much so. It's a beautiful description of it. And like in terms of the impact of the war, like how did that, like in a kind of a practical sense from the diaries and accounts, like do we have a sense of how that actually changed life and changed flying at the time?
Yeah, well, Foynes became a very secretive place during the war for fear the Germans would come and bomb it. So a lot of army were sent down here, and there was a motorbike squadron set up in Mount Trenchard, radio communications. We actually have a D-Day map where the lads on the Met, see the first commercial Met service began in Foynes as well, and radio communications, and the first airmails. So you've all those things. So there was sentries at the bottom of the stairs type of thing, where you would have the password and only a few had to gain access to the radio rooms. It also meant that journalists and all of that were barred from coming into the village, and if anyone of importance, and let me tell you, I can't, off the top of my head, I can't name them all, but I can say royalty, heads of state, VIPs, movie stars, film stars, singers, all of them came through Foyens, because you couldn't go from America to Europe without coming in here. And you never knew who was on a flight. They came, like, I know we have the passenger list for Eleanor Roosevelt, and she came in as Mrs. Eleanor Smith. So you would find out when the flight left that Eleanor Roosevelt was in town. You know, you wouldn't know it while she was going through. So it became very secretive. But I suppose it was the vital link between Europe and America. And without it, they were in trouble. So they did everything possible to make sure nothing went wrong. And I presume life was good in Foyens, because I'm only guessing this now, but for all the local women, you had all these dashing guys coming in, and dashing pilots and crews and that, and lots and lots of romances. And I presume for other people, it was a source of great income at a time when employment wouldn't have been huge in this area. I mean, what I find extraordinary, if you ask me for one thing about Foyens, it's that in the 30s and 40s, it had every mode of transport possible. We had a train service, a passenger train service. We had the planes. It was a commercial port. We had all these fancy American cars, and we had the horses and the carts and the bikes and the car, all of that. So everything. And that's, I would say, that's almost unique to us in a tiny rural village.
The most connected place in all of Ireland.
Yeah.
And like one story that I was fascinated and kind of bemused to learn during my visit, during my last visit down to actually experience the museum, was the fact that the Irish coffee was created and founded, and the kind of the backstory as to how it happened. I just thought so inherently Irish. You might just share.
Well, we always say the weather does everything in Ireland, and the weather was the cause of we ever getting an Irish coffee. When Dev came down, Dev was big into aviation and Lemass, and he said, you know, who's running the restaurant? And they said, well, the British are. And he said, no, we should be running our own restaurant. And I suppose they put my hero and the most extraordinary man possible in charge of setting up a restaurant in the airport building. And that was the late Brendan O'Regan, who went on to do so much that is just unreal. He set up the first duty free, you know, the Bunratty Castle, the Pogue, Cooperation North, the Peace Institute, was chair of Board Falta. This is a man that was the greatest Irishman ever. And he came in and he recruited, and he brought so many women with him. But then he advertised for a chef, and he got an application from this guy called Joe Sheridan, who was working in Dublin, and who had moved there from the north with his mother and brothers. And his application, Brendan told me, said, "Dear Mr. O'Regan, I'm the man for the job, yours sincerely." And he thought he was so impotent, he would see what he was like. He got the job anyway when Joe was here. And flights often left Foyens and would depart for New York. Now, they weren't pressurized or anything, Sarah. You know, they flew at about 6,000, maybe 7,000 feet or something like that. And they flew through all the weather. So if the weather became too rough on the Atlantic crossing, they'd make a decision at some stage to come back before they'd gone too far. So flights could come back, and you could be flying out for 5 hours and back for 5 hours, and you're back where you started after 10 hours. But anyway, so that happened in the month of October. We weren't able to define the exact date, but it was the month in October in 1943. So the staff would have been called back into the museum and told to get the kitchens opened and be ready to make some food and hot drinks for the passengers. And that's what happened. And this diplomatic courier came, and Lal Dowry, that I told you about a while ago, brought him in and said, "Joe, give him something special." And Joe said, "I will." And he threw whiskey just into a normal cup of coffee. And your man said, "Geez, that's great. You know, what kind of coffee did you use? Brazilian?" And Joe said, "No, Latin, Irish." But a few days later, he knocked on Brendan O'Regan's door. He'd put it into a glass, as we know it today. And he said to Brendan O'Regan, how about that for eye appeal? Because Brendan had always said to them in the kitchen, food must be good, but it must also have eye appeal. And they started serving it, look, from that day on, Sarah. And as you know, it's on every menu in the world. So we have the lovely story of Irish coffee being invented in Foyens as well.
That's definitely a positive contribution of the negative Irish weather sometimes.
Yeah.
It's I think that's such a charming story. And like Maureen O'Hara, who you mentioned kind of briefly at the beginning of this conversation, someone you described as kind of ultimately a friend for many years. I'd love to just know a little bit more about, herself and her husband, and some of the key memories you have of her time with Foyens.
Well, she married Charlie Blair. Unfortunately, they were only married for 10 years when he died in a flying boat. But she retired from filming when she married him, and she moved to the Caribbean with him. He had retired from Pan Am at that stage, and both of them, he was the chief pilot, and they set up their own airline in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands called Antilles Airboats. And only in the last few days, I see on Facebook different stories coming in about her scrubbing tiled floors. She wasn't, standing up there in ceremony. And when he died, she took over. Well, no, she'd kill me now for saying that. She always made a point. She was voted by the shareholders to become the CEO when Charlie died. And she did that for a few years and discovered it was a rough job dealing with all these crews and trying to keep them all going. And she sold out to Resorts International. She went back to films many years later, and she did one called Only the Lonely with Anthony Quinn, Milo O'Shea, and John Candy. And like the way she was, we got the European premiere of that for Limerick and Foynes. She did a few TV ones after that. But she came to, more importantly, I suppose, she visited us every year from 1989 to 2012 or 12, except one. And that was to celebrate her birthday on the 17th of August with us. And we would have a big Irish coffee festival, and she would present the trophies and, all of that. And she'd have come and stayed here in my home with me. And she was down to earth. She was great to be with. As you know, she had a house in Glengariff and spent a lot of time there. And when she died, I was privileged to be asked to go to her private funeral in Arlington Cemetery, where she was buried with Charlie Blair, who was also there. And that's a huge honour, of course. And she could only do that, be buried there, because she was his widow. She never remarried. If you remarried, you lost that privilege. And it was fantastic to see our Arlington Cemetery, not too far from the Kennedy graves, and see how the American Air Force came to remove her casket and take it to the grave. And it was really very touching. And then I suppose her surviving daughter lived in Glengariff and unfortunately died the following year from health reasons. And then that just left a grandson in the immediate family, Conor Bowe. And Conor Bowe is out in Boise in Idaho. And one night we were here and my phone went and it was Conor Bowe, nothing unusual. And he said to me, would you like a few grand's dresses? And I thought, oh God, that'd be great. So he said, why don't you come over and have a look? So myself and my friend Mary Rohan went off and we went to Boise, and he took us to warehouse upon warehouse. And Margaret filled 3 40-foot containers and shipped them home. And we have everything. We have her Oscar. We're so privileged. We have her Oscar. We have all her personal memorabilia. We have her clothes. We have the Quiet Man clothing. We have the trap from the Quiet Man. And we have wonderful, wonderful display. And that's there as a temporary exhibition at the moment. And hopefully, fingers crossed, in the not too distant future, we'll have a complete wing to just put out. Because like most people don't know that Maureen O'Hara was so Irish and so proud of her Irishness. And when she went to take American citizenship, she'd have dual citizenship then. She filled the forms, did all the things, and she arrived to do the swearing bit. And there was one more form, and that form you filled it up, and she did, and then she got to a sentence which said previous nationality. And she went down along the list. No Ireland. Ireland wasn't there. United Kingdom was. So she went up to the clerk and she said, there's something wrong with this form. And he said, no, there isn't. She said, yes, there is. I'm Irish. Ireland is not here. And he said, well, tick UK. Well, she hit the roof. And she said she would not. She was Irish and that was it. And he said, well, if you want to do something about it, you have to go to court. So off she went. She went to court. She came in front of the judge. She made her case, fine, Ireland should be on it. And he said, no, the paperwork was fine. It had been done for, used for so many years and blah, blah, blah. But she tormented him so much that as she went out the door, she turned back to him and she said, Your Honour, she said, do you know what you've just done to me? And he said, what, woman? And she said, you've deprived my children and my grandchildren of their heritage. Can you live with that? And he said, will you give that woman what she wants? Get her out of here. And they actually changed the law, and Ireland went on the form, and she duly went back, ticked Ireland, and got her citizenship. Dave heard about it, and he wrote to her, and he asked her when she next came home would she bring the paperwork with her, and she did. Mm-hmm. And we have a lovely photograph of Dev, Frank Aiken, and Maureen looking over those documents. And the hat she was wearing, we also have.
She sounds incredible. I think for someone.
Yeah. You didn't take her on an argument. She was very forceful. As I say, she never failed to promote Ireland, never. And the one thing she would have dearly loved that she never got before she died was the freedom of Dublin. Okay. She'd have preferred that more than any Oscar, but it didn't happen. And it's something I feel sorry about, because it was something. She was a Dub. She was born in Dublin, reared in Dublin, and all her family were. But anyway, we have her Oscar. We have the address that was made especially for the Oscar night so all of that. So you'll have to come back again, Sarah.
Oh, I can't wait. It's if I could currently go more than 5 kilometers from my house, I'd be in the car quite happily. It's
well, we're all in the same boat. We're all locked down. It's dreadful. I know we have to be, and I know that we have to abide by the rules, and hopefully we'll all survive it is the main thing, Sarah, and that we will get to open our doors again and welcome visitors. For us, I think you're very lucky in that you're in Dublin with a good footfall. For us, I think it's savage because 80% of our business was overseas, particularly from America, and that won't come back for a long time. And also we've no public transport per se, except a bus once or twice a day that doesn't suit anything. So you had to come in a coach, and coach business was huge for us from all the major tour operators. So I don't see that coming back anytime soon. So I do think that for the next few years, times are going to be tough.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenging moment. I think it is definitely, there's no clear sight of which way it's going to go for museums in the foreseeable future. I think we, kind of that which we can't control, we're trying not to kind of focus on. And so it's kind of, I think one of our hopes is really to spend as much time as we can in the next year or so, really re-engaging with, I guess, the local audience and kind of people who live on our doorstep and are kind of living across Ireland. And I think it's there when some really wonderful moments happen, when we get the opportunity to actually engage with people who've grown up around us and to actually hear each other's stories.
You see where our content suits the American and the British market very much. Now, that's not to say that this year, I think for the short time we were open, we had 10 or 11,000 visitors from Ireland, and that's wonderful, and we just hope we can get more. But Foyens wouldn't be considered a hot tourist spot. You kind of go through it to Kerry or go through it, to Clare. But look, you never know.
We have to, I guess, kind of do everything we can and work with the tourist boards to really build it back. It's because, like, you and Foyens, you're located along the River Shannon, so you're in a location that has a first of all, a beautiful vista, but a kind of a particularly important kind of historic story.
Yeah, we were on the Wild Atlantic Way as well, which is great, and that's been promoted heavily, and hopefully that will help.
And I've made a couple of notes here because I was looking through I was looking through photographs on my own mobile phone from my last visit down to Foyens, and I've enthusiastic pictures of my partner sitting at the the cockpit, seemingly driving the flying boat. But I had a caption board that I'd taken a picture of, talking about Windsor Castle, which I remember enjoying the story. The Windsor Castle ghost ship, is that? Oh
yeah, that's in the maritime side. Yeah, that came up the river, it seems, with no crew, and it was a ghost ship, and there was lots of paper, and some local fishermen from the Clare side. We wouldn't do it in Limerick, you see. The Clare side went out and brought it in and got the cargo and everything, and it went on for a long time, but no one was ever able to give a really true story of what actually happened and how it came about. I mean, the maritime side of the museum is also fascinating, because we have the shipping of Confederate uniforms to America, made in Limerick in Tate's factory, and brought to Foyens, put on Tate's boat, and sailed and broke the blockade and was delivered to the Confederates. So there's all sorts of angles to us, Sarah. We have many different angles.
And when did the last flying boat fly out of Foyens?
We're very technical here now. Okay. The last scheduled passenger flight was October 1945. Then we had some charters after that, and the last one of them 49. And then Charlie Blair came back in 1976 with Maureen and his own flying boat. And then when the museum opened, I got one of the surviving flying boats, a Sunderland, to come back. And we had a Catalina 2 years ago for an air show, but for commercial operations, 49. Okay.
And so you mentioned that there was uniforms going out. What sort of cargo was generally coming in and out, or did it really?
Passengers.
Passengers.
Yeah. Cargo bits were funny. First penicillin was flown into Foyens. Orchids for a wedding in a dare flown into Foyens. You have these unusual stories that we picked up in Irish intelligence files, because we have some intelligence files as well.
And then, okay, so it's interesting when you kind of learn these little kind of niche stories. I wonder, and this is probably both a mean and an impossible question to ask, I wonder what your personal favorite story or artifact in the museum is, and why?
My personal favorite. There's some funny ones.
Okay.
The pilots used to stay in the Dunraven Arms in a dare. One guy stole a silver set of cutlery, knife and fork and all the rest, because at that time they were the heavy silver. And when he died, in his will, he left them to a pal of his who was with him when he stole them. And his daughter brought me back the knife and that. I mean, you just have to laugh, at how these things. I suppose I have to go back to the very beginning when we had nothing. And Maslin's widow handed me that first logbook, which was the first flight ever on the Atlantic. That really has a special place. And there are a few other bits. As I said to Lal Dowley from Dublin, and her husband, and he was Pan Am operations, and he was dying of leukemia, and he came to Foyens when he was in remission, and I was searching and asking so much for an original ticket. I would love a ticket for the museum. And he arrived, and Bob, and he said, sit down there, and he opened up this bag, and he said, I had him in my will, but there's no fun in that because I won't see your face. Okay. So he handed me a ticket and 2 tickets and a baggage tag and that, and we had a good cry. So you have all these special minutes, that you'll always think about.
That's really special. That sounds like a particularly It's amazing. I've thought to myself probably half a dozen times in this conversation so far, that sounds like a really special moment. Like you can tell that
Yeah.
people, like so many people very clearly
A
care.
lot of moments tug at the heartstrings, you know. We have funny stories then, and people come in, they tell us funny stories that happened, and you know, and you get the laugh with it too. But I have to say, it's down to wonderful staff and everything. It's not just me. We have wonderful staff, and they're with me for years and years and years. And you know, I think it's important that we still make every visit very personal, and we welcome people, and that we give them time. Now, it's not easy. You know, sometimes the height of the summer, and you'll always get awkward ones. There's no doubt about that. And you get the people, we had the people just before we closed, and they refused to wear masks, you know, coming in. And you have to be nice and say, well, look, you have to, and all that. You know, you get all that too. It's not all plain sailing. But having said all that, I think when we do leave this world, we leave something behind.
And something pretty
That's important.
pretty amazing. Absolutely.
That's important.
And like, I wonder if you went back to speak to yourself 10 days into this initiative when you started working on it 30 something years ago, what did you think you were building at that stage, and kind of how is it compared?
4 small rooms that when they gave them to me, they said, give them to her, she'll do them up, and we'll have them back in 6 months. She won't last. That's the truth. That's what they said. But I think you get pretty determined when you're in this industry, and no one and nothing will put you down. You'll give it your last breath to keep going and make it the best it can be. And as I say, when you get staff in and all that, you're there for them too. And we have great staff, and they're local, and they have employment, and it's nice employment, and you get friendly, and it becomes a big family.
We were, I think the odds put on us in the beginning was 7 months. So we're. Yeah.
I got 6. You got better than me.
Yeah, it's plus 9.5 years, and we're still fortunately going. It's and so, if looking into the future and what you're kind of hoping for Foyens, like what does, from either artifacts or the future of the museum, like what do you hope for it? What are you?
I hope that, as I think I said to you, we're in the process of just submitting a major application for funding for, I suppose we have to look at it, Sarah, that tourism is fine. It's a short period in the year. And we're now at the stage with 26 staff and fairly substantial overheads. You have to look at how you can raise funds in the off-peak and during the winter and all that. So this will take us to a whole new level with a mini conference centre, 112-seater cinema that could be used for maybe film festivals and that, and ways and means of a remote working hub, ways and means that we can actually develop a business for the winter that will support us in our museum work, because you know the standards are high. It's not easy if you have to get a display case, they're not cheap, so all of those things need to be funded. And we're looking at being more than just a summer visit, but that is our main business, but just things that would, you know, support us.
And it's an amazing thing, because you're from kind of the hub idea through, you know, you're talking about ways to make it a winter business, but you're also directly looking at how do you create value to the local community as well.
Well, we're very close to the local community, and we hope, you know, normally we'd host the seniors' Christmas dinner and party, and you know, people come to us after funerals because we don't have a hotel or anything in the town. So all those things, we're part of the community, and we offer them a lot of services, but we want to offer them more if we can. And I think during this COVID time is an ideal time, if you have funding, that you can go ahead when we're not overly busy and get the building works and all that done. It's a time for maintenance and for all that.
Yeah, I think we're very much treating it the same. We're doing an awful lot of backlog of kind of artifacts and so forth at the moment. I'm just seeing a couple of comments coming in. I'm just going to touch on them. Kathy was saying, Margaret, thank you so much for such a lovely, wonderful talk. Did Louise Blanc ever land with yourselves?
Louise?
Blanc, Loiseaublanc.
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. And then I see Liam Campbell writing in saying, I could listen to Margaret all day with her fascinating stories of the history of Foyens. History with a human face. Thank you. And then Bridget was warning you that everyone here with us this evening will be coming in to visit you as soon as possible. And then
we look forward to it.
Absolutely. And then I see Linda here saying this is her personal best episode so far, and she's definitely looking forward to a visit. Kathy, it appears my pronunciation is terrible. Le Sau Blanc, is that? No. But anyway, it's Margaret, this has been really, truly wonderful, and it's really such a privilege to listen to you speak and to hear you talking about all that you've accomplished on behalf of the museum. And I think as someone who definitely had no intentions of running a museum, as I personally think
absolutely no.
It's quite an amazing thing. And like, how is everyone in Foynes getting on these days? How is life going?
Most of the staff are on their COVID payments. 3 of us are still on the payroll full time, and like that, we're getting the paperwork, the stock taking, the archives. I have a brilliant young man who we captured and hope to God will keep him forever. Barry O'Kelly is our operations manager, and he's wonderful. And we're very lucky that we have an accountant living locally who went to part-time, and Anne is with us as well. So we have a great little bunch together, and we're doing the best we can, work remotely from home. Some days we do have to go in, we have separate offices if you have to scan and, print and all that kind of stuff. I was there all day today, and I'm there all day tomorrow because the deadline for this grant is Monday morning. So it's just, I think without I have to praise and thank the government for the COVID payments, because without them, we certainly would all be gone. And they're the only thing keeping us going, and long may they last until we get back to some normality with visitors, because without them we certainly wouldn't survive.
That's it definitely is proving to be a vital support at the moment. And
yeah,
I guess we have to be hopeful and optimistic that there will be an international tourist season that will return. When exactly that is obviously unclear to us still, but I'm so inspired and kind of heartened to hear of everything that you're doing in Foynes and have done up until this point. And I really, it builds confidence that us as a sector will get through this, and it's get past this moment and get to the point of thriving once again.
Yeah, we never thought we'd ever face something like this. We've had 9/11s and we've had wars and whatnot, but you see, the virus, you don't know where it is. That is the hard part. With the rest, we knew where they were, and what was happening. But with the virus, you really don't know where it is, and that's the tricky part,
Yeah, but I think that it's a tough moment in time. But I guess the what's sitting in the back of my mind right now is that Maureen O'Hara quote that you said to me a little while ago. Give me the exact wording again. Don't talk about it.
Don't think about it, do it.
Okay.
And I think that's a good motto for anyone.
I think so. I think there will become a day, hopefully in the somewhat near future, where we can stop thinking and doing. And I think I may well borrow her words and live based on that for the next while. But it's been an incredibly quick hour, and Margaret, it's been so truly wonderful to have you here. So thank you. Just thank you. This has been one of the nicer hours I've had in the last couple of months. So thank you so much for giving your time. And
thank you for giving me the opportunity, and hopefully some few will hear it and some few will visit. That's what it's all about. So thanks, Sarah. Stay safe and well, and we look forward to meeting again sometime soon.
I can't wait.
Nice.
And thank you everyone who's been with us here for the evening as well. And thank you for all the lovely comments. And that brings to an end another episode of 120 Dublin Stories. So Margaret, thank you again, and good night everyone.